Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to my session, Getting Started with AL, with my top 10 tips for beginners in AL. But before we start with the session, let me shortly introduce myself. My name is Michaela Gayer. I'm co-founder of Learn for Dynamics 365 and MBS Training. I have 20 years of development experience in CAL and now in AL. I also have nearly 20 years of application experience. I have been working as a developer, consultant, project manager, and for the last 15 years as trainer for Business Central and NAV. My main job today is to be a video training and book author. Before we start with the session, let's talk about the goal for today's session. You would like to become a developer in AL, so this session is a guide for you with tips and tricks to get you started with AL programming. So let's start with my first tip. Before you start developing in AL, you should define your starting position. Do you already have development experience? If you don't have development experience, you should get some basic development experience at least. If you have development experience, what programming languages do you have experience in? The second topic is database knowledge. Business Central and NAV in the past always had a database in the background, so it is quite helpful to know a little bit about tables, fields, relationships, keys, and things like that. That help you to create better solutions for Business Central. The third topic, and this is a quite important topic, is application know-how. You cannot be a good developer for AL if you don't know the application. So if you don't have any application know-how, I recommend to get at least some basic application know-how at the beginning. And furthermore, you should advance this know-how. Then you should define your goal. Do you want to become a primary developer and will this be your main job? Or do you just want to customize some pages, reports, or things like that in Business Central, and your main job is, for example, a project manager or a sales consultant or an application consultant. And last but not least, you should take a look what resources are available for you. Do you have experienced colleagues in your company? Are there classroom trainings on a regular basis within your company? They could be internal or external. Do you have books? Or do you have access to online material like video trainings? So that brings me to my first action point for you. Evaluate yourself. Think about all these topics. Think about your development knowledge, database knowledge, application knowledge. And after you have done that, it also makes sense to review that knowledge with a colleague of you or with somebody else within your crowd and define, okay, where do I start from? What do I start from? And what knowledge should I get before I start developing in AL? My tip number 2, know the business application. I have already mentioned that. Why is it so important? Development always follows application processes. So you cannot be a good developer if you don't know the application. If you have to develop a posting routine, for example, or enhance the posting routine, you should know how the posting routine works for the customer or for the client or for the user, however we want to call it. You have to speak the user's language. You have to understand what the user wants from you, and you have to develop a solution that the user wants to use and can use. So if you don't speak the user's language, if you don't know the terms that the user is using, you should get knowledge of that. And you should know the starting point for your development. For example, if the customer wants you to develop a functionality in cost accounting, you should know the cost accounting module and on what area of the cost accounting module you should start with your development. So that leads me to my second action point. Try as much as you can. Get access to a Business Central client. It doesn't matter if this is an on-premise client or a client in the cloud. Get access to it. It can be a demo client, that doesn't matter. Or if you work for a customer, that much better would be to get access to a customer's client, a test company, for example, and then obtain application know-how as much as possible. And also try to use various resources here. Are there any books available? Try to use the online help. Or again, if video training or other online material is available, try to use these. Number 3, the development environment. AL uses Visual Studio Code as development environment. Please note that this is not Visual Studio. Visual Studio Code is not only available to develop for AL. Visual Studio Code can be used to develop for various application development languages. You can use nearly every development language with Visual Studio Code. You can also use Visual Studio Code to use, for example, PowerShell. So install Visual Studio Code and get in touch with it. Second, get a basic knowledge about JSON files. Why is this so important? JSON files save basic settings for the AL development and for your project. So try to get a little bit knowledge about the structure and the reason of JSON files. As the development is done in Visual Studio Code, we have the situation that the code is not directly executable. You always have to have a client somewhere. This can be a client in the cloud or a client on your local machine or within your company. So you have to make sure that there is a Business Central client available. Last but not least, this is an advantage now, we don't need a development license to do the development in AL. But please be aware that you need a customer license or a license within your company to run and test your solution. So what is my action point here? As just mentioned, install Visual Studio Code, install the AL extension, and try it out. Click through these various menu items. You could read some online manual, or there are also books available that explain Visual Studio Code very well. So try to get some basic knowledge at least about Visual Studio Code. That can help you a lot to develop better solutions and to ease up your development. Number 4, before you start to do your developing, you should think about source control. In the past, we normally had our development code on the server side. So the code was saved, and if more than one developer was developing in the same database and the same solution, we had also some problems, but the problems were not the same as we encourage today. Today, Visual Studio Code is developed on your local machine. And if you don't have a source control, your development code is also saved on your local machine. So this could cause errors. Problems. You don't have a backup of your code. And it is hard to share the code between multiple developers. What you should also think of is the project structure. How does a typical project look like in my company? Do I have subfolders? How my files are named? What object IDs should I use? And also, should I just develop one app for my solution, or should I develop more than one app for my solution? And how should I divide my solution into these apps? So these are all topics that you should think of. If there is already a structure within your company, you can use that. If not, you should think or talk to colleagues and start to develop a kind of source control. So this leads me to my action point. Start like a pro and you will start right, I have called it. I think there is nearly no alternative of using source control. You have to use source control, even if you are the only developer within your company. So if you don't have a source control in place, try to develop some kind of source control. Learn publishing before coding. Publishing can be tricky. If you have a client in the cloud or a client on premise, it makes a difference in the publishing process, at least a small difference. And sometimes the publishing doesn't work from the beginning. And if you are not a very experienced developer, it can cause huge problems to get the publishing working. So my suggestion here is first to try to publish a simple app, for example, the Hello World app, that is shipped when you download the symbols, when you create a new project, not when you download the symbols, and try to publish this app. And if this publishing is working, then you can start with your development. That eases something for you, because if you then have errors, you just have to solve your development errors, and you don't need to take care of the publishing problems. So my action point here, as just said, create a new project and say hello to your server. That means try to publish the Hello World app to your server or to your client in the cloud. Snippets and extensions. I call snippets as your best friends if you are a beginner in AL development. Snippets provide a structure for your code. Snippets always start with the letter T. For example, if you want to create a new table, you type in T and table, and then you get a snippet with a basic table structure, and you just have to change the data to your ID, your name, your field name, and add your properties, and so on. So that helps you to have a more clean code at the beginning. It helps you to avoid errors, and it provides you a good structure at the beginning. If you become a more advanced developer, you might don't want to use snippets anymore. This is also fine, but for the beginning, for your first object, I really recommend to use them. So the second topic here is extensions. Extensions can also be a good friend. There are lots of extensions available for the AL programming language. I was looking up these extensions about 2 weeks ago, and I found nearly 30 extensions that help you developing for AL. So look through these extensions, install one or the other of them. If you're not happy, they can be easily uninstalled. Extensions have only the disadvantage for beginners that you don't learn to develop from scratch. You sometimes get nearly a full solution and just need to change some things there. That speeds up your development. But to better learn from the beginning, at the beginning, it might be better not to use extensions. But there are also extensions available that give you additional insights. For example, some kind of object explorer that we had in the past in CAL. So this, I think, is also quite helpful for beginners to get a better knowledge about AL and the standard database and the standard code. So what is my action point here? Remember the letter T to use your snippets, and browse through the marketplace in Visual Studio Code and install some extensions if you want to. Number 7, this is a topic that I have always told to my trainees when I did development trainings. Don't reinvent the wheel. What do I mean with that? Nearly every requirement exists in a more or less similar way in the standard application. Let us think about a timesheet functionality. There is already something in the standard application. So you don't need to develop a timesheet functionality from scratch. You can add your functionality to the standard timesheet functionality, even if it's not the best timesheet functionality in the world. Why do I recommend this? If you develop your own timesheet functionality, the user can find 2 timesheet functionalities when he uses the search, your one and the standard one. So this could cause problems for the customer or the user. And the second thing is, if there is an upgrade, it might be harder for you because now there is a much better timesheet functionality available in the standard application, and you don't need your timesheet functionality anymore in that way. So, if possible, try to start with a topic in the standard application. Then I would recommend to use the same naming in the standard application. Why do I recommend this? I think this is very clear. For example, if the number field is called NO dot, it makes sense that you call your number fields the same way, because then the application looks more uniform to the user and the code looks more qualified. You should also use the same name field types and field lengths. For example, let us think about ledger entry tables. They have always an integer field as primary key field. So if you create some kind of ledger entry table within your solution, you should also use an integer field as primary key field. Then you have the same behavior as standard tables have. And you should also use the same length for your fields. Most of the time, or very often, data is moved from one table to another. So if you don't have the same field length, that could cause problems. So let us think of a customer name. The standard length is 50 letters. If you create a table using a customer name with 100 letters and you want to shift your customer name to the customer standard table, that would make problems if your customer has more than 50 letters. As already mentioned, try to extend the standard application, and now in AL, use events as much as possible. Try not to change the standard application. In the past, we had no other chance. We had to change the standard application very often, but this led us to very expensive upgrades and very complicated upgrades sometimes. So if you want to make your customer happy, and if you want to make easy going upgrades for the customer, use events. Don't change the standard application, if possible. What is my action point here? Familiarize yourself with the standard application. You cannot start in the standard application if you don't know it. So loop through the standard code and try to find out, how does the standard code look like? How is the standard code structured? How are field names named? How are tables named? And so on and so on. Reports. Reports have always been a special topic, and they still are. Reports are different. Why is this the case? Reports have two design layers. Reports have a logical design, which is done in AL, and they have a visual design. Visual design is done either in reporting services like the report builder or in Word. So you have to know two tools. You have to know the AL development language, programming language, and Visual Studio Code. And you have to know, for example, the report builder. So at the beginning, it makes it much more complicated because you have to learn two things instead of one thing. The second thing is, reports are not extensible. There is no report extension. If you want to create or develop a report or extend a report, you have to copy a standard report and change it, or you have to develop a report from scratch. So this makes it also a little bit complicated for beginners. So my suggestion is here, learn the AL basics first. And if you're familiar with the basics and you feel very well, then start to learn report design. Don't forget to learn how to handle errors. This is also a quite big topic when you start testing your solution or your customer starts to test your solution. It doesn't help if you are the best developer in the world, but you cannot fix errors. So get to know the debugger that is available in AL. Learn how to work with problems, how to loop through problems, and how to solve problems. Sometimes it's easier to ask a colleague to solve a problem, but don't do that. Try to solve the problems yourself. Try to become the best developer in the world. And this is sometimes painful, but it helps. Try to understand the code base. The standard application does not always look very easy, very, how shall I call it, very easy to understand, but try to look through the standard application. Try to understand the code. Try to understand what the developer wanted to do. And learn how your program executes. What processes are started and how is the sequence of your processes. So what is my action point for this? If you have already developed a little app, set a breakpoint in one line of your code, start the debugger, and try to stop the debugger at your breakpoint. And then loop through your code and see what happens. So this is my last topic. Now you might ask yourself, how can I start now to learn all these things? I know now what I should learn, but how to start? First of all, Let me give you 2 sentences. A day without learning is a day wasted. So try to learn as regular as possible. Try to learn development at least once a week. Don't make too long breaks. You forget too many things. So the best thing would be to do a little development every day, but if not possible, at least once a week. And try to learn step by step. Do not try to learn everything at one time. The application, the financial area, manufacturing, and everything together, and development and reporting, and also want to learn database and Power BI and so many other things, step by step. Today, I want to learn how to create a table. So this is my topic for today. And then do this. And if you are happy with that, you can now create a table, then take the second step. So I have also provided here a little example from our website how you could get started. First of all, you could get started with our online training Introduction to Business Central. So this is a general overview of how to use the client, how to filter data, how to sort data, and things like that. If you already know all these things, for sure you don't need to do that. But if not, this is quite helpful. And then there is the online video training, Programming in AL. This guides you step by step through all the basic things that you need to learn to become a developer. If you're experienced with that and you want to become an advanced developer, you can do many other online trainings like financial management, I already mentioned that, cost accounting, sales, purchase management, and so on. And there is also, beside other technical trainings, the report design training in Business Central. If you want to visit our learning path, I have also added a link on the right. It's l4d.click, get started AL. So let us sum up my 10 tips. The first one was define your starting position. Where do I come from? Do I have development know-how and application know-how? Yes or no? The second one is, do I know the business application well? If not, try to learn it, or not try, learn the business application. Get to know the development environment, Visual Studio Code, AL extension. Think of source control. Do we have already source control? If not, what source control suits to our needs and do we want to use? Learn publishing before you start to code. Use snippets and extensions. Don't reinvent the wheel. So this is not a tip for beginners. This is a tip for everybody who does development in AL. Reports are different. So at the beginning, if not really necessary, try to avoid doing reporting. If you're the only developer, you have to do it, but maybe not right at the beginning at first topic. Learn how to handle errors. If not already done, learn it. And my last tip was a best practice learning path. So at the end, I would invite you to take a look on our website. We have a free trial. You can enter the link l4d.click, free trial, and there you can find lots of online training material and try it out if that suits your need and if this is helpful for you. So that brings me to the end. I want to say a big thank you for watching my session, my presentation. I hope you get some good tips. And now I'm online available. If you have any questions, you can now enter the chat room and chat with me. And I'm looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you very much. Bye.